Hi everyone, please consider subscribing. It's completely free, but it really helps the channel. Thank you. To begin, I want to thank you all for the many positive comments that were made in my last video. At the same time, I'll also begin there to address some comments that seemed a bit puzzling, such as people saying they couldn't understand why I was saying what I was saying about Trump based on his astrology. I thought it was pretty clear that the planets in transit now, during this period, particularly March, and also as it's turning out April as well, are in a very difficult place for him. And by planets I mean pretty much all of them excepting Jupiter. Let's give that one a little bit of an out. But Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Eris, all the outer planets. And the reason is they're forming, angles that become the ABCs of astrology. If you have squares, which are right angles or oppositions, planets on the other side of planets, or difficult conjunctions, you tend to get more difficult events, and he pretty much has them all. And the one that really turned it on in terms of ramping up the difficulty in March, and which then becomes the main reason I was saying what I was saying about his difficulties, is the transiting Saturn in the 8th house squaring his Sun and Moon. 8th house is in fact taxes and therefore tariffs, and that's what he's chosen to do, which I believe was a huge mistake, and the world seems to be telling him now that it was a huge mistake. That's the astrological reason for that. Now the question is, where is this going? I continue to see positive effects based on the idea, if this is what you want, which is to put a check on this guy, or preferably stop him completely. Now here's the thing, to stop him completely, meaning poof, to cause him to disappear, I've said that pretty much the only thing I could see would be the fact that the planets themselves, through the angles they're making, are threatening his health and well-being. And this is something that, if it happens to someone, then who knows? Any number of things can happen, from being disabled to who knows where, but that would be a possibility. There's never certainty in astrology. Astrology is almost like a really brilliant system of odds. It shows you the odds of something happening. But a person can experience it in different ways, such as, for example, this is a really glaring example of this very thing. The same house in astrology that rules something terminal, your death literally, is the house of tariffs. Now, you could say, well, okay, that's it. The tariffs will kill him. Well, maybe they'll just kill him politically, but they may not necessarily do anything more than that. Thing is, though, that other subject, the terminal subject, could show up. It's possible. The other thing we add to that is that very seldom do you get astrology transits that last only a few weeks. They typically encompass a year or more, because these planets, what they do is they do the pass, but then they retrograde and then go over the same area again. Hence why I've said it's difficult in the spring, then there's a swath of time when it may be a little less difficult, and then the energy resumes in the fall. Why? Because Saturn comes back to near where it is today. Now, based on what has been taking place, I'm encouraged, from the perspective again of checking this guy. And So one example would be that if we're being strict, we'd say the Saturn angle to his Sun and Moon, squaring both of those, was more precise in March than it is now. By now, it's moved forward such that you would point it more at a trine to his Venus, which some astrologers have said, oh, he'll be off the hook. That's it. Well, he's not off the hook. Not at all. Not even close. Part of that is that, yes, it's moved further along. It's catching another planet in a trine, which is supposed to be supportive, but the problem is it's still too close to that Sun square. It's too close. It's 25 degrees. The Sun is, in his chart, is 23 degrees, but you have to add precession correction. It's still there. It's still bothering him, quite obviously. Right? Now, this tells me that it's very unlikely that this guy finishes the year, from fall into winter, in any kind of good shape, because Saturn is back there again. And I am also seeing, and this is where an astrologer has to judge, how is a person using the planet? How are they aligning with the planet? He's not doing a good job of this. He just isn't. The very idea that he would go into the tariffs the way he did is completely nuts, and lots of people, lots of smart people, were probably warning him, or if they weren't warning him, they were certainly warning us. It makes perfect sense that this was a really bad idea. Now, he can try to save face by completely abandoning it, but he really can't do that. So this is very unlikely to change. And we know, because of the effect of these tariffs, which are actually taxes, that chances are very, very high that prices will go up as we go toward the summer and into the fall. And of course, this is not good news for us. It's not. Because if we pay more for everything, nobody's happy. But it's not good news for him. Right? That's the key thing to focus on. And I put this together with a recent success in an election and the fact that there are more elections to come. And the fact that, I see the Saturn working in his chart. I see that he's not doing well with it. Then I see that next year, now this is pretty far away. If we look at the 2026 midterms, that's a long time away. But you can see where the planets will be. Saturn is right on him there. Different place, but nevertheless, highly, highly effective in terms of checking him, meaning electional losses. At that time, it's in a square, much like it is today, except the square then is to his Mercury. And now Mercury, if you look at any Gemini individual, Mercury becomes extra important because Mercury is the ruler of Gemini. Separately, the Saturn is doing it at that time, the square, from a place related to legal matters, foreign affairs, and also say that I already know from prior events and prior years that he really dislikes planets in that part of the chart. Things don't go well when he's getting pressure from that zone. Case in point, the very degree where Saturn will be doing its square in 2026, in late 26, concurrent with the election, which is pretty bad for him, that is where Jupiter was back in 2022, and I mean precisely. Jupiter was there when the FBI went into Mar-a-Lago. Now, it doesn't matter that that didn't turn out at the time or later into something that stopped him dead in his tracks. We can't look at that. All we have to look at is that that zone he doesn't like, and the fact that if that was bad, it caused him to scramble madly for quite a few months. This is much worse. Saturn is much worse than Jupiter in its cycles. It's slower, it's more grinding, it carries far more accountability. You don't want it there. Right? So the thing is, we can hope for something to happen to this guy between now and that election in 2026 and other elections that will happen in between. And yes, it's possible for the reasons that I outlined, the 8th house, the fact that it's a very dangerous house. And separately, I've mentioned that the Uranus cycle, particularly until at least next spring, it's still linked to the American moon. And so it is very, very possible that we will get some crazy event, such as the type of event that happened last year when Uranus was at those very same degrees, which triggered an attempt on him, plus the change in candidates in the Democratic Party. I mean, it was a kind of a crazy, turbulent time. That's the kind of thing Uranus can do. But my counsel is, even if that's possible, don't bank on that. Don't be assuming that we're going to be saved by, some powerful thing from somewhere, someone will come in. If it happens, great, take it. But assume we may have to just keep moving along and work toward, through the election system, checking this guy. Now again, you could reply, no, he's going to fix the elections. People are constantly assigning this guy powers that he doesn't have. He's going to try. I'm sure he's going to try all kinds of things. But I remain completely unconvinced that he has that kind of power. He just doesn't. If you believe it, fine. But even if you believe it, let's say that you're just completely convinced that he has that kind of power, I still would say to you, don't give up. Act as if he can be stopped through the electional means by, for instance, continuing to join demonstrations, continuing to call your congressperson, continuing to do whatever you can to stay in the battle, even while, as I've said in prior videos, I know, and it can be tricky, I understand, remain as calm and centered as possible. Why? Because otherwise you won't feel good. If you are filled with rage and anxiety, and you can still continue to take action, but you're not going to feel good. And typically, poor decisions get made when one is operating from that kind of energy, right? But, as I say, I am encouraged. For example, today, in the midst of all this insanity, the Supreme Court pushed back on him, on his idea that he could just send anybody anywhere without any due process. They don't seem to agree. Now, why is this important? This is very important because if they don't speak clearly about it, every time they give him a pass, he'll try to go further. He'll try to push and do more and more. But remember, see, this is the thing, and why astrologically, again, it brings in some optimism. The place where Saturn is, or rather I should say where it's going, because Saturn right now is in his 8th, right? So if it doesn't knock him out completely in the 8th, and it might, at minimum it's doing a pretty good job of tarnishing him in a pretty major way, because he will forever be known as this idiot who brought in a totally misconstrued plan that has put the U.S. in a pretty tough spot, right? But that's in the 8th sign, Pisces. It's going into Aries. We'll get a little bit of that in the summer of 25. Then we get fully Aries energy starting in the spring of next year. That cycle, and especially as we move toward that spot that I was mentioning where Saturn is around election time, that's a house, a set of legal matters, foreign affairs. So it's a pretty strong suggestion that if Saturn is there, it's going to stop you. It's going to make things really hard on the legal level. I mean, look back, when Jupiter was there, he was getting embroiled in some pretty dicey legal stuff. I mean, when the FBI enters your house, whether you like it or not, that's getting pretty serious. Well, this is Saturn. Saturn has the suggestion of stop, no, can't go through there. And now you can come up with all the reasons you want about why he can sidestep that. The astrologer says, no, you can't sidestep it because Saturn is there. And remember, the key with the it's there, it's the proximity. Just like now, what is getting him is how proximal Saturn is, how close in degrees, because it wasn't there when he got elected. He snuck in there. Saturn was much earlier. Right? Jupiter was more focused by degree, closer to where his sun and moon are. Of course, right now, he does have Jupiter. Right? And because Jupiter is the one that is going through opposing his moon, conjoining his sun, until about sometime in May, when it finally it leaves Pisces, or pardon me, it leaves Gemini at the end of May, but it'll disconnect from his planets even sooner than that. This is a way for things to keep going for him, but given the way he relates to Jupiter, it'll just encouraging him to be, even more arrogant than he already is, to misjudge things even more. It really isn't a helpful energy, particularly in light of what comes later. And that's the key, because the Jupiter leaves, goes into Cancer in the summer, not a helpful sign for him. And then the Saturn locks into a place that definitely does not work for what he's trying to do, and especially what really disturbs us about what he's trying to do, this lawlessness, this attempt to be a total autocrat and just do whatever he wants. That's where having that Saturn up there is very, very helpful. All right, I'll stop there, and I think I've covered a number of things, but what often happens is that when I finish, I often will think of what I didn't say or I could have said, but in that case, I'll take it up in the next video.